Amigos, no magaratok, each batzik, Jesus me apenikas, mikinak me joenemik, sagita kongo timbiodos. Greetings, my good friends, my relatives. My name is Harry Bone. I'm from Kichikoinen First Nation, Treaty 2 area. I normally start my talks about my grandmother and her story, about our language. That's how I start. My grandmother was born in 1880, 150 years ago, so is my grandfather. But she often stressed about the importance of language, the importance of words, the importance of who we are through our languages. So Anishinaabe language is what she used. She's never spoke a word of English except English, speak the Anishinaabe language. So for me, I think I was raised by my grandparents, so I knew the language through my grandparents and their teachings. And the ceremonies at that particular time were starting to happen in the 50s and 60s, like Sundance, wet lodges, Medewian teachings, that kind of stuff. So I began to look at those from an earlier times, speaking only my language. I didn't speak a word of English until I went to grade 1 and I would say 6 years old at that particular time. So I spoke only Anishinaabe language up to that time. So my grandmother also says in our language, ke gui kauni ke ken, iwege Anishinaabe moing, ke shingutunguni keni Anishinaabe moing, apchiki gomikiti magi is gui semegi kitoko. Akana we Anishke gamiabaja, ke chikai kitot, chimchimentamanaga, understand. In other words, what my grandmother said to us was, if one day you forget your language, you'll forget your thought, your teachings, and your way of life, what the Creator's given to us. You'll have to depend on somebody else's language, someone else's thoughts, someone else's concepts to try and explain your identity, who you are. And that's where it's going to be important for us, because you're going to go into someone else's culture, someone else's who they are as people. So I think she knew at the time, because 150 years ago in the treaty making process, her father was one of the chief negotiators in Treaty 4, and she often said that she heard from her parents that language is important, because language will be the one that's going to be permanent in our ways. So my grandmother was the language, the stories that she told. But there's one story that I like to share that she often told us about it. As a young woman, one morning in early spring, she had gone to the creek, to get fresh water. Just before she got there, the sun was just about coming down from the east. As she looked up that way, she knew the sun was coming up, but fresh water to make tea, because she was down there for the creek. As she looked down, to her right, she saw a little man sitting on a rock. That little man sitting there was, had hair, pure white hair, and he was looking at the water, the flow of the water. He was also carrying a pipe, smoke, a pipe that he was carrying. He was looking at the water. So so my grandmother didn't know what to say. So she scoped to get water, to make sure that she got her pail of water, and she got up to look at the little man. He was gone. So she often wondered what the reason behind seeing this little man. So later on in ceremonies, private ceremonies that we had, the shaking tent ceremony, she had asked what was the meaning of this little man's appearance with her. She was simply told that you're going to live to be a long time. You'll have a lot of years to live, and because of that white hair. And she did. She lived to be 103 years old. And when she died, then she had pure white hair. The other lesson that she learned was, that little man was looking at the water. The water is about life, the flow of water. So water became an important issue for her. The most important part, she learned from that was the pipe ceremonies that is done. When she was reminded, the pipe was always, the important part of our ceremonies, especially in the treaty making process. Even before then, even the Hudson Bay era treaties that was made, from that perspective. So I think, knowing my grandmother's dreams, her experience with that little man, told us how important it is. Because as our sister came to visit us, from Saskatchewan one time, we were heading out west to visit my uncle, who was working for a white farmer. So on our way over there, the storm was setting up on us. So the storm came and got on top of us. So there's 4 of us, my grandfather and 2 of my grandmothers and myself. So we stopped. Then we were on a wagon. So my grandmother, then my grandfather covered the wagon with a tent because it started to rain. There was lightning, thunderstorm coming, from the west, just coming on to us. So as we sat there, then my grandfather, got a little bit of sticks, then little fire inside, underneath the wagon there in the tent. She started a little fire. My grandmother, the one from Saskatchewan, got her little pipe, digged out her little pipe, from her bag. And that's the first time, then I saw a pipe ceremony that close, and the words that she used. She simply, then asked the thunderbirds to make sure that they look after us as they come on to us. As she prayed, then she spoke in our language. She pointed the pipe upwards and thanked the Creator, what and why we exist, then our Creator and she looked downwards, then to Mother Earth and touched the earth, then thanked, for the water, the air, and all the creation, medicines and all that. And she also made that circle in the 4 directions, and she told about, our languages, our teachings, our way of life, and our journey in life. So those 7 sacred directions had a profound effect on me. And after she was finished, then making that prayer, she put down, she put her pipe down. So as we looked out to the west, the storm was now not coming on to us, but moving northwards. In other words, then the storm completely missed us. That gave me faith, then believing that, then because her prayer probably answered, by the thunderbirds, then for not, giving us that, then that rain and that storm. But we missed the rain, we missed the storm. As we mentioned, my grandfather was moving along, then the trail, this dried road. So I often believe from that perspective, the teachings of my grandmother, her experience, seeing that little man, and my other grandmother, from her experience from that prayer, I strongly have faith in the belief system of our people. So I often remember that, because that's the way that, then I learned the foundations of our treaties, where the treaties come from. Because when I was growing up in the 50s, then our ceremonies were very much alive. But one in particular is in 1969, when the white paper was introduced by the government to do away with our people. No more special lights, no more special reserves, no more special things. That white paper became an issue. So at that particular time, our chiefs, including our chief from our reserve, his name is Robin Blackbird. He was a very traditional person, that Robin Blackbird. So I was already at the university at that time in 1969. I was attending university, so he left word, that I'd come home. They were doing ceremonies because of this white paper. Him and another chief, an elder that they used from Valley River, his name was John Ironstan. So they started doing the prayer, and Chief Robin Blackbird said to me, he says, watch very carefully what that man does, where he points that pipe. Watch very carefully, and hear what he says. Listen very carefully what he says and watch him very carefully. So same thing with my grandmother, where he pointed that birds upwards to acknowledge the Creator, to thank the Creator for listening to us and taking care of us. And downwards to Mother Earth to thank, the water, the medicines, and the food, and all its creation. In that circle to make sure they're all are included. And to the east, he pointed that pipe to remind us that our languages, our sounds, our sentences come from there. And he pointed to the south, to remind us of our teachings that we are told. Teachings about our pipe ceremonies, sun dances, Medevian teachings, and all those teachings that we learn. By the time that he went westward and pointed upward to westward to remind us that our history came from the grandfathers and grandmothers that left their history behind us through their languages. They said this westward is where the history is all about, to remember where we come from. So he often told us that you have to remember where you come from if you understand where you're going to go into the future. So she often mentioned that all the time. So I think, that it was northward, she said, Kiweden is the word that he used. Kiweden is going home. So he says, we have a life in our lifetime. The Creator is given to you, whether it's 10 years, 40 years, 80 years, or beyond in your lifetime. Then you have a responsibility to carry on those teachings that you had, based on your history, based on your language, based on, the Creator and the land. So she often said that about those teachings. So I grow, to understand, how important that pipe ceremony was done. Because as you probably know, the pipe ceremony was done, even before the Europeans arrived here for 500 years beyond. even before treaty time, the Great Hudson Bay era, the pipe ceremony was done, at that particular time. It was a modern, way of doing business that time. So I think, the pipe ceremony became an important part. So that's why, at the time of treaty, 150 years ago, pipe ceremonies was done before we signed the treaties. 4 nights, 4 days, just to make sure that we were guided by our Creator. So for me, I think, I've learned a lot in those years, and I practiced those years, what our traditions. But for me, I think, what my grandmother taught me about the language is important. The language is what we need to do to make sure that we survive. Because she often said that, the people coming to settle here are not going to be good to us. We may depend on their languages, we may depend on their teachings, but they're going to have introduced, they have a term, violence, he said. There's Christian things about violence, he says, and recovery and that kind of stuff. Ours is about love and respect. So I think, then those 2 teachings reminded me of my grandmother, how, she talked about us. So I think, for me, that's my message, is about language, it's about ceremonies, it's about our traditions, it's about our history from our perspective. And it's demonstrated through our pipe ceremonies every time we do a pipe ceremony, because the elders often told us, including Reuben Backward, he often said that, when you do a pipe ceremony, that's your identity, that's who you are as people and as nations, that's your nationhood, that's your sovereignty, that's your law. Anishinaabe on the Shoaven, he would say. So I always remember those 7 sacred teachings about the pipe ceremony, because that's what guides us, who we are as nations. So that's why we're still very much alive today and before. So I think, for me, that's the message that we like to provide, as elders, to make sure that, the pipe ceremonies are honored, and not only to be honored, but also to remember and to understand what they stood for. They stood for, the languages for our people, the teachings for our people, our history, our way of life, and the foundation of, the Mother Earth, and the foundation of, the great Lord, the great teachings of our God. So I think for us, that's important to us, because that's what we fail to do, because we try to, introduce a lot of things into our way of life, because of the Indian Act, because of residential schools, that the government tried to deny us our history, our way of life, our languages. We were not allowed to do our ceremonies at one time through our languages. So thank goodness for our grandfathers and grandmothers keeping that alive. We're very much alive today. So that's the message I like to provide. So with that, miigwech.